Hello and welcome to another edition of Backstage Pass. My guest today is the world-renowned lighting designer and consultant. He is the founder and chairman emeritus of Theater Projects Consultant. It's Richard Pilbrow. Hello, Richard. How you doing?
Hi, Bill. This is weird.
Well, yeah, this is an unusual position for us to be in.
It is.
But that's okay. That's okay. I think we have things covered here.
We do. Right.
So one of the first things I wanted to ask you about was a role that you played in your career that not a lot of people know about. It is your role as a producer. Everybody knows you as a lighting designer and as a consultant, but you're also a producer. I'd like to hear a little bit of what that meant for you.
Well, that was sort of weird. As a lighting designer in the early 60s, I, in England, had pioneered a system of projecting scenery, which on a very large scale, which in those days was a bit unusual. Now it's common as mud, of course. But Tony Walton, who's my great chum, designer, he and I did a show in London called 1/8 that was a big hit, and it had very large scale projection. And it was a big hit, and Tony introduced me to Hal Prince, who was about to do A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum. The original production was Zero Mistel.
Mm-hmm.
Tony Walton was designing it, talked Hal into using projection. So I was flown over to New York, my first ever trip, to be the projection consultant. I was like the queen of projection, the Wendell Harrington of 1962. And show was a success. And Hal turned to us both and said, would we be interested in being producers? So I said, yes. I always say yes when people ask me things like that. And so I became his partner in London, and we produced A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum in London.
Mm-hmm.
Huge success, ran a couple of years, and began my life as a producer. And we did shows. I was Hal's partner for about 30 years, and we did shows like She Loves Me, Fiddler on the Roof, which was the big hit, Company, Cabaret, Little Night Music, things like that. And then I brought lots of regional theatre from in England into the West End. So it was a great period. It was fun. One time I had like 5 shows running in London. The important thing for me was it widened my horizons. Having been a little lighting fella, you know, I realized the world was bigger than stage lighting. And both as a lighting designer and a producer prepared me to be a theatre consultant. So it was a fun period.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. Little known fact.
Right.
So I hear that you have a Jeannie Rosenthal story that you'd like to tell.
Well, yes. Jeannie was the lighting designer of A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum, and I was the projection consultant. But I had a great shock when I first came into an American theatre, because nobody drank. Now, I wasn't a complete sort of boozer, but I had found one of the paths to success in London was to have a little bit of hospitality at the production desk. In fact, I had a production desk built with a cocktail cabinet inside. So when things got particularly fractious, 3 in the morning, the choreographer's having hysterics, I would say, have a gin and tonic. This wasn't allowed in the American theatre, which caused me considerable upset. And Jeannie taught me this fact. Anyway, opening night on Broadway arrives, and I get to the stage door, and there's a parcel for me from Tiffany's. It's a little blue Tiffany box. So I undo it, pull out the wrapping, and it's a ham sandwich. So I was a bit surprised. So I picked this ham sandwich up, and it's a flask Jeannie had made. So I could sit in the theatre and have a little scotch. It relaxed you all.
Nibbling on your ham sandwich.
That's right. That's right. Yes.
Excellent.
She was a great lady.
Yes. Never had the pleasure, but
just like my granny. I had a granny, a very similar, little tiny woman of enormous charm.
Right. The National Theatre just celebrated its 40th anniversary, and you were involved in that celebration. And you've been involved with the National since the beginning.
Right.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I suppose I have to say I'm obviously the luckiest person I ever met in my life, because about 3 months after I meet Hal Prince and decide to be a producer, the phone rings at home, and I'd just been in the Isle of Coll. I have this place in the Isle of Coll in the Hebrides. I'd just driven 12 hours back, and the phone was ringing. I pick it up, and Dickie Pilbrow, the voice says. I said, yes. He said, Laurence Olivier here. I said, oh, yes. You know, pull the other one. Anyway, he said, what are you doing tomorrow? So I said, nothing. He said, come to Chichester, sort out the lighting. Fellow lights garages. It's bloody awful. So I go to Chichester the next day, and I walk in, and the lighting was indeed awful. It was lit like a football stadium all around the edge, which meant if you were on the edge of the stage looking in, your face was in darkness. So I said, give me 10 minutes and I'll talk to the chief. So I go downstairs, and the chief says, I said, we've got to move half the equipment. He said, you can't. So I said, we've got to. He said, you can't. So I said, won't work unless we move everything from there into the middle. He said, you can't do it. I said, why not? He said, we open tomorrow. Well, this bit I didn't know.
Right.
Because I'd been on holiday. So I go up to Sir Laurence, who's rehearsing on stage. I said, Sir Laurence, I'm sorry. I know what we should do, but you open tomorrow. There's no time to do it. It'll take like 36 hours to move everything around. He looked at me and he said, well, you're no bloody good, are you? So I left. It's obviously the end of my career. The following January, he phones again. Says, Dickie, it's January. We open in June. Does that give you enough fucking time? So I became his lighting director, and was through all the seasons at the Old Vic, lighting all the shows. And by then I had a whole team of associates, the Theatre Project's lighting design team, about 18 of us. And we lit everything for the first sort of 10 years. And then I got involved in planning for the new building. And was on various subcommittees for a while. Then I got promoted to the building committee, which was a group of directors and designers who had been selected by Larry to help the architect. And then the architect, this wasn't going very well. They'd been talking for about 3 years, and all these directors had different ideas. Seldom came to the same meeting twice.
I was going to say, it didn't sound like much of a promotion.
It was confusing. And I gradually got to know Lasdon, the architect. And he finally said, I need somebody to deal with on a full-time basis. And so Larry asked me to be the theatre consultant. And I'd done some consulting by then. We'd done some of the regional theatres. And we were sort of advising architects informally. And I thought, well, this is a bit of a promotion. You know, the National Theatre is rather serious stuff. So I had a school friend, Richard Brett, who had gone into the BBC. He was a BBC engineer. He's number 2 in charge of studio planning for the Beeb. So I rang Dick. I'd tried to get him to join me about 5 years before. But he said, look, I work for the BBC. I've got a damn great pension. Will you give me a better pension? I didn't know what a pension was in those days. And so I said, Dick, we got the National Theatre. Now I can offer you a bloody pension. Right. So he joined me. And we set up Theatre Projects Consultants, a separate company, which he ran. And that began the whole thing.
You were asked to light Zorba on Broadway, which meant that you were the first British lighting designer to work on Broadway.
Right.
How'd that go?
it was pretty exciting.
I'll bet.
Pretty exciting. I mean, I was sort of, again, luck. I was Hal Prince's partner in London, and I was known as a sort of projection consultant here in America. I'd done Golden Boy and shows, half a dozen shows on Broadway as projection. But of course, because of my relationship with Hal, he said, "Richard, I've got this show, would you like to light it?" So I said yes, again. And Boris Aronson was the designer, which was like meeting God, you know what I mean? A fabulous man. So we had a wonderful, wonderful time. It was interesting because Hal in England is always very quiet and polite and gentleman. And Hal, on a big Broadway musical, I found out was a rather different character.
Very different, yes.
As Boris Aronson said, never be the victim.
Yes.
You know, Hal could get extremely excited behind the production desk. But I got on with him very well. He sort of had to, I think felt he had to be nice to me. But it was very exciting. It was wonderful. And because I was allowed to join the union, so I went and did all my swearing, you know, to buy only American underclothes and stuff like that. And funnily enough, Theron Musser was at my induction into the union, which was wonderful.
Sure.
Because I've got to know her through Golden Boy and other shows.
Right.
So it was pretty exciting. I was very honored.
You have seen a lot of changes in lighting over your career, and LEDs are the next new thing. And at this point, they've been adopted and accepted on Broadway and in theaters. What's your opinion? What do you think about the state of the lighting business these days?
Astonishing. Oh, it's amazing, absolutely amazing. I mean, I'm in my 60th year lighting. Things have changed. I mean, I remember I actually lit a show in my 57 at the Savoy Theatre that had water dimmers. You know?
Water dimmers.
So the world has changed. Mm-hmm. And I've had a really interesting experience just recently because I've just done this My Fair Lady revival for Julie Andrews at the Sydney Opera House. And the scenery and the costumes are beautiful, totally accurate reproductions of what it used to be when it was first done in 56. And Oliver Smith, Cecil Beaton clothes. And I sort of worked out that you couldn't light it like Abe Fader did 50 years ago, 60 years ago, because the world has changed. And if you literally reproduced Abe's work, which we studied in great detail, it would look pretty dim and not very interesting. Julie Andrews, actually, of course, who starred in the original, she remembers it. She said it was very hot in patches. And apparently it was very patchy across the stage because he had lots of beam projectors. Mm-hmm. So anyway, in discussion with Julie, we finally agreed that I would light it from scratch, sort of inspired by what he had done. So with lots of modern stuff, that's what we did. And it was, for me, an unbelievable experience because lots of Mac Vipers and LEDs and all sorts of stuff. We had an amazing time, but you can put a pinprick of light at any point you want in any color at any moment and then move it from A to B and X to Z, and it's just the facility is extraordinary. And so it was a real delight. And I think we brought the whole thing to life, but in a much more sort of modern, richly modelled, coloured way.
Right.
So it was a dream assignment.
Terrific.
Yeah.
This was at the Opera House, right?
Well, that was the less dreamy part. The Sydney Opera House is, the most beautiful theatre outside and one of the worst theatres inside on the planet.
It is.
So
pretty
it was
dreadful,
a nightmare getting it on the stage.
Right.
Took months and months of trying to fit it in, and it's just a Broadway show, you know. So wasn't that huge, but we did eventually get it onto the stage. But it was tough, and
Right.
the whole production period was exhilarating, shall we say. And it's a huge hit, massive hit, sold
Terrific.
out,
Right.
which is lovely. It's a great show, of course.
Of course.
And Julie is actually a bloody fine director.
Yeah, I was going to
I've
ask
worked
you.
with her 2 or 3 times, and she's
Right.
extraordinary.
Yeah.
Of course, she knows theatre
Sure.
backward, and is a perfectionist.
Mm-hmm.
So she inspired the cast, who were terrific. And it was altogether a very exciting experience. They've just moved it to Brisbane, and it's on tour in Australia for about a year. It's wonderful.
Coming to New York?
No, I don't think it is going to come to New York, because Lincoln Center are doing their own production. We have hopes it will go somewhere else.
Oh, okay. The next one I want to do, and this is a bit of a selfish thing on my part, is I was working at the Savoy Theater in New York in
Right.
'82 when Genesis came through with Three Sides Live, and they had Verilites.
Right.
We didn't know what they were.
Right.
They came in under the cloak of darkness at night, and the technicians we weren't allowed anywhere near them. And then opening night for the band, and these lights were lit, and we were looking at the lights, and it didn't look like very much. And
Right.
we said, well, what's the big deal? And then they moved.
Yeah.
And of course, all hell broke loose.
Yeah.
So, and we thought, what
Yeah.
is this? It was wonderful. Do you remember when you first?
Oh yes, very clearly.
What was that
Wally,
like?
Wally Russell
Wally Russell.
introduced me to the whole thing. He lit Tristan and Isolde at the LA Opera, which was all Verilites, and he invited me to go see it, and so I did. I flew to LA, and it was just mind blowing. Now there was a real problem, which of course is way still with us. Like, they were bloody noisy.
Yeah.
And he had, I forget, 100 Verilites, something like that. And that was a serious problem, but the potential was clearly mind-blowing. So that turned me onto them. Of course, Wally was very involved with Verilite. And,
Sure.
helped in their development and so on. But so they're lovely.
Great
lovely.
fun.
Yeah.
You have a holiday house up on the Isle of Coll in the Hebrides, which is up there a bit. And how did you come to find that place, and what's the attraction for you up there?
It's like going to heaven. It's a very remote old ex-farmhouse. It's about a mile from the road. It sits just above a beach, beautiful white sandy beach with the sea rolling into it, and there's an old wrecked timber ship stuck in the beach that was a shipwreck from 1895 or something like that. It's the most romantic spot on the planet, in my eye. And I found it totally by chance. I'd just done, I think it was Blitz, which is a hugely complicated musical about, the war in London for Lionel Bart. And I was sort of exhausted at the end of it. And I and my first wife, Vicky, who was a partner in the business, we, in complete exhaustion, just went up the west coast of Scotland. We had a basset hound with us. She used to be my favourite dog. And we were phoning ahead to bed and breakfast to find somewhere to stay. And we couldn't find anywhere that would take dogs. So I was in a little cafe, and a woman behind me was waiting for the public phone.
Right.
And she said, "You're looking for a place to stay?" So I said, "Yes." She said, "Have you thought of going to the islands?" So I said, "No." She said, "You go to the Isle of Coll. It's so far away, they even bathe in the nuddy." Well, it's appealed to us, right? So off we set. And we got there, and it was idyllic and great little pub. And we found this ruin. It was just a ruin, about 6-foot high walls, no roof or anything at all. And fell in love with it. Found out that the Laird of Col owned everything. So we went to see him and said, would you sell this ruin? He said, what for? So I said, well, we'd like to make a holiday house of it. He said, well, you must be mad. So he said, well, could we buy it? He said, well, I suppose so. I said, well, how much would you want? He said, oh, you'll have to talk to my lawyers. Well, Vicky and I looked at each other because if there were lawyers involved, we knew we couldn't afford it.
Right.
You see, we go back to London. That was the end of it. About 6 months later, a letter from Edinburgh lawyers. Mr. Pilbrow instructed to enter into negotiations with you. Mr. Stewart has to ask a sum of £150. So I thought, well, we can afford £150. So we had the freehold house in the Hebrides for a rather modest sum of money.
Right.
It took about 10 years to build it.
Right.
I used to take gangs of people from theatre projects. We used to go up for our holidays, mix concrete, you know. But it's been my lifesaver, you know, this wonderful, chaotic world of theatre.
Sure.
3 in the morning with everyone having hysterics, you know, I can sit there and pull this bubble over myself, you know, one more word of this lunacy and I'm out of here. Right. Back to the Hebrides.
Wonderful.
I've been every year since.
Great.
It's a long time.
So, one of the outcomes of the building the National was all the technology that came out of there, all the new technology, and lighting certainly was part of that, and lighting control. You had a new console from the that you did develop for the National, right? Right.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, because I was in that extraordinary period where we were moving from manual, huge handles, you know, to little presets, and then into the computer age. And as lighting director at the National, with this group of designers who I worked with all the time, who began as my assistants, but then became their own men and women, I got very frustrated with the way lighting control was being developed in those early memory days. So the National gave us this bizarre opportunity of building something special. And so we did, and I, with Brett's help, designed a whole new control system. And it was all about not working only in channels, but in groups of channels of random makeup, and being able to play them simultaneously, like mixing paint. And this thing was called Lightboard, and Strand won the contract to build it with Martin Moore, a brilliant team at Strand. So they built 2 of these things for the National. And they were, false modesty aside, a bit of a breakthrough, you know. In fact, got some really good friends in lighting in England now, you know. The latest doesn't actually do some of the stuff that Lightboard did 40 years ago.
Right.
And it's all about the fluidity of mixing light, because light is extraordinarily ephemeral stuff. You know, it changes in shape and time, and raise emotion and do almost anything with it. You know?
Right.
And the control systems tend to be, you press a button and the lights change, and that to me is actually a bit of a backward step. You want to be able to move it and mix it and change it in a much more fluid, intuitive manner. Now we're in the days of rather mechanical processing the lights. Lots of numbers and all that. And I don't really believe in this thing. I think it ought to be, you have to, you know, do it much more creatively. Right. Anyway, Lightboard began that process, and most of the modern control systems copy some of its attributes. They haven't quite caught up yet, which is my next ambition.
Right. So, kind of like you got it right the first time.
We got a few things right. And it was because we were totally embedded in the National company. I mean, those first 10 years with Olivier, you know, amazing hit after hit after hit. I mean, his Othello and astonishing productions. But we all lived with it.
Right.
You know, so it was a really close harmony between the theatre company and us sort of designers and technicians. And so it was a really creative opportunity. And out of that came Lightboard, and then stuff that's very famous now, the drum revolve in the Olivier and the power flying and stuff. That it moved the goalposts forward a bit. It's all old stuff now, but it was exciting.
That drum revolve is still exciting.
It's amazing.
Yes.
Absolutely extraordinary. Yeah.
And that was you and Richard? Richard?
Yes, yes. We were basically the concept of the theatre had been decided upon before I became consultant, and it was our job to sort of plan the building backstage, then design the detail of the stages, and then propose all the equipment. And we wrestled with the Olivier in particular because it's a pretty unusual form of theatre. It's a sort of half a thrust with a space stage behind it and an audience wrapping round like 120 degrees. So how do you actually change scenery when it's in the middle of the audience? So we wrestled with this for months and with the theatre company. And finally decided, yes, you had to have a full grid and fly tower, but pipes would be useless, because why would you hang stuff straight across? It could be at any angle. So that Dick Brett came up with the point system of little pulleys across the stage on track, so you could move anything where you wanted, and then lock them together electronically. And with the new computers, you could control them all. And then what do you do with the floor? So we actually looked in Vienna at the Berg Theatre, which is a very famous drum revolve with rectangular elevators in it. But that didn't really do the job, because we had a rectangle in a circle has got lots of limitations. Bits around the edge you can't move. So Dick, in fact, we were in a cafe somewhere in Karlsruhe or somewhere like that in Germany, and Dick drew a napkin with a circle and just drew a line across the middle. Said, why don't we have semicircular elevators? We called it the theta drum. Oh shit, that's a good idea, you know. And so that's what we decided to do. So it allows you to, it's full of traps and elevators inside the drums. There are two big elevators go up and down about 40 feet, very fast and very silently. And then in each elevator are traps, so you can make holes wherever you like, and you can put them at any angle to the audience. So it's proved to be pretty exciting. They've done some good stuff with it.
Confirming once again that all the good designs are done on bar napkins.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Now the problem was that the building was appallingly late being completed. You know, it was meant to open in 72, and we got to 76 and it still wasn't finished. And Peter Hall, who had taken over from Laurence Olivier, determined he was going to open whether the building was ready or not. He didn't give up over whether it was or not. And so Dick and I had to get it so actors could act. So we had to get the floor finished and turn the lights on and have a, you know, microphone or something. And we opened, but nothing was ready. I mean, the control rooms weren't plastered, and they were putting in this brilliant new equipment. So it was a very, very bad period. And it wasn't, the equipment wasn't finished. The flying was finished in 78, 2 years late. The drum didn't work till 82, and it wasn't really used until, do I mean that? No, 86. Yes, it was. It wasn't used. So it was a nightmare at the time, absolute nightmare. But it was eventually finished, and it worked fabulously well when it was finished. But it was like trying to, you know, win a Grand Prix and the car didn't have any wheels on it. So it was extremely embarrassing. Peter Hall was rightly furious. You know, it's probably why I left the country.
Richard, with all of the things that you've done in your career, is there anything that you turned down that you regret that you didn't do?
I'm not very good at turning stuff down, in truth. I generally always say yes to everyone. I did have a somewhat unfortunate time with Phantom of the Opera. Do you know that story?
I don't know the story, no.
Well, I was lighting Phantom of the Opera through Hal, of course.
Right, of course.
And I worked on it for about 4 months with Maria Bjornsson, and we actually created the whole production concept. And we were doing it. And Hal rings up one day and says, Richard, we have a problem. He said, the book is shit. We're going to rewrite. So there's a postponement. So I said, no problem, Hal, that's fine. 3 months later, he phones up again, says, we would go. I think November the something or other, in 86 or something. So I said, no, Hal, that's not a good idea. He said, what do you mean? I said, please not November. I had committed as the sort of head of theatre projects, and we used to have this big lighting rental company in those days, and a sound rental company, and video, and all sorts of stuff. And I'd committed to produce, direct, design, and light an industrial show for ICL computers that was like £1 million or something. And if I didn't do it, it would be a financial catastrophe. So I said, Hal, I can't do November. He said, well, you've got to. That's the only date Andrew can make and Cameron can make and all that stuff. So I said, well, Hal, I'm sorry, I can't do it. He said, what am I going to do? And I said, well, I've got a really, really good young assistant, a boy I'm really proud of. I'd like to introduce you to him. And it was Andy Bridge. So Andy took it over. Phantom of the Opera. I had 0.75% of the gross. And if you do your maths, you can tell that was not a good idea.
It's not a good idea at all.
But otherwise, I've accepted most stuff.
Right.
Most of it terrible. Anyway, what's money?
Yeah, of course.
You know, wouldn't make you happy, would it?
Yeah. I've heard that you've designed a few theaters in your day. 1 or 2, maybe. Yeah.
Well, that's probably true.
Yeah.
I think it's not me, it's the team at Theatre Projects. We've been involved in 800 or so projects
800.
all around the world.
Right.
I began, before the National. We did these regional theatres around Britain, Sheffield, Birmingham, places like that. And then the National. And I had a growing sense while we were building the National that while all backstage was okay, there was something not right about the auditoria that we were designing. And I always remember up in Col, one day David Collison, who was my partner in the sound business we used to have, he and I drew the Olivier full scale on the beach. We went up the hill opposite our house and looked down and said, oh, fuck. This is big and barren, not very promising. But it was in concrete by then. So after the National, frankly, the stages are good, but the auditoria, I think both the big auditoria have problems. So then, during construction of the National, we were asked to design the studio theatre. When Peter Hall was appointed, as a condition of his appointment, he got permission to reinstate the studio, which had been cut for economy. Right. Yeah. So I had met this guy, Ian McIntosh, and I just hired him like 3 weeks before this particular meeting with Peter Hall. And he said, could you design a studio theatre? So I'd hired Ian because Ian had run a theatre company on tour around England and around the world, actually. And he had come to understand that some theatres worked and some theatres didn't. And he was able to put into focus for me what it was about. That theatres are not just about the stage and all this technical stuff. Theatre's about the audience and the relationship between the audience and the actor. Great theatres of the world are all about clustering the audience as close to the actor as possible to create that sort of vibrancy and excitement that makes live theatre live. That the National Theatre doesn't do. So Ian designed the Cottesloe, which is the most successful theatre in the National, and that began us on a sort of reassessment of what the theatre was all about. And essentially, ever since the National, we have gathered together a team of architects, engineers and theatre people to create theatres that are all about meeting people. They're all about the actor and the audience all holding hands together, all exciting each other. And it took me many, many years to understand that was the essence of theatre. I began as a stage manager, and I was on a long-run show at Her Majesty's Theatre, in fact, in London. And every night the actors would come on or off the stage, and they'd have one or two things going on that either, wow, we're flying tonight, or where the fuck did you find that crowd, And without the audience, theatre is nothing. So I gradually came to understand that great theatre architecture was all about bringing actors and audience together in a sort of dynamic, thrilling relationship. So ever since the National, for the last 40 years, we've taken the initiative in all the theatres we've done to create not just the stage, but the stage and the auditorium. And it's all about liveliness, and it's the opposite of staying home watching a telly. It's all about live, vibrant relationship, people meeting each other. And that's a recipe that's been very successful. So we expanded into the Middle East, the Far East, China, and almost later, America. We began here as a theatre consultant in the late 70s. And things were different in those days in American theatre design. George Eisenhower ruled.
Yes,
and
he did.
He built these engineered theatres with perfect frontal sight lines, none of those old-fashioned boxes, and balconies were not approved of either. And gradually dawned on me that we had a different approach, and we started and it caught on. We did Portland, Oregon, Calgary, Alberta, and dozens of theatres since. And all our theatres are about bringing people together. The uniqueness of theatre is that liveliness and thrilling exchange. You're not watching the telly, you're not watching a movie, you're part, the audience are part of the show.
LED screens and projection are the name of the game these days. They seem like they're in every show. What do you think about this technology, and how does it help, or does it help the performance?
That's a tough question. I mean, I love it. In principle, I can't wait. Except I'm too old. But the ability to create any image on any surface anywhere is seductive, isn't it?
Yeah, sorry.
I mean, I began in America as a production consultant, but the possibilities now are mind-blowing. So I love it. I love it with one caveat. I absolutely believe the most important thing in any theatre is the living actor meeting the living audience. And it's real easy to distract with all the miraculous stuff we can do these days.
Right.
And if the actor, and I'm talking legit theatre, which is my world. I've never been lucky enough to do a big music show, but in legit theatre, if the actor isn't up front, you've probably got a serious problem. So it can be immensely distracting, but done subtly and harmoniously and beautifully is mind-blowingly wonderful. Yeah.
Okay.
And when you think how hard it used to be to create those images, you know, with scrims and backlight and front light and gobos, I mean, now it's frighteningly easy, but it also can be frighteningly distracting too. Mm-hmm. So it's balance. Well, so much in life is about balance, isn't it? You know, and having the actor, lighting the actor is all about creating the world in which the actor lives, you know, the three-dimensional air that the actor breathes, and having that in proportion to huge projected images is very difficult. It's real easy to make it look fabulous but spoil that balance. So it's a fabulous tool, needs a great deal of subtlety in its execution, I think. That's me being old.
Tell me about Moll. How did you meet Molly?
Well, I was asked to light a musical, The Rothschilds, on Broadway, and Jules Fisher was in my office in London. I, in fact, was explaining to him how the drum revolver was going to work.
Right.
And I said, Jules, I need a favour. I'm looking for an assistant in New York. He said, oh, I know just the person. And he had taught her at NYU, this girl called Molly Friedel. So I said, might she be interested? He said, well, I'll ring her up and ask her. So we rang her up and asked her, and she said, yes, she was. So she was my assistant. And in those days, rules about sexual harassment were not quite so rigid as they are today. So we ended up getting married.
There you go.
And she was a very efficient assistant. And we opened the Rothschilds in Detroit. Now, I may be the only person on the planet who thinks Detroit is a very romantic spot. Right?
Okay.
Because, as usual, the scenery was all late. John Berry designed this massive set, and it was late, so the load-in went on probably 10 days or so. And it was August, and a heat wave. And Jerry Bock, who wrote the music, and Sheldon Harnick, who wrote the lyrics, were very close friends of mine. Because I produced Fiddler on the Roof, which they'd done. So we spent an awful lot of time with nothing to do on stage, because nothing was ready. A lot of time around the swimming pool.
Right.
And we got very well acquainted.
So I noticed a poster of Company over on your wall here, and I saw Company back when it first opened. I loved it, and I loved Elaine Stritch. I thought she was just fantastic in that and so many other shows. And I hear that you've worked with her, you produced Company with her, and I heard a story that you might want to recount about her coming over to London one time.
Right. Well, Molly had just arrived in Britain. And, I mean, she knew me as a sort of lighting designer, and then she sort of found out, my God, he's a producer as well. So she was a bit surprised by that. And I said, come on, Moll, we're going out to London Airport to meet Elaine Stritch. Now, Elaine, about a month before, had said she wouldn't come to England without her dog. So I said, Elaine, you cannot bring your dog. You're coming for 6 months. your dog will be in quarantine for 6 months. You cannot bring the damn dog. Well, first she said she wasn't going to come. And we had the whole company, the whole American cast, New York cast were coming. So we had a bit of a argy-bargy about that. And between Hal and I, we finally said, yes, you'll come. So we go to the airport with a wonderful man who was my press rep at the time for the show. And we walk into London Airport. Elaine comes through customs in a rather a frenzy, carrying one bag. I said, Miss Stretch, where's your luggage? I've left my damn luggage. Get me out of here. So we go out, the car's parked outside. Moll is sitting in the back seat. I said, Moll, this is Elaine Stretch, and she said, get me out of here. She sits in the passenger seat, opens a bag, out comes the dog. There's a policeman 10 yards down the road. I said, bang! I pushed the dog. I said, Elaine, you're crazy. You'll be arrested. This is a crime. The show will be cancelled. We'll be in serious trouble. She said, get me the fuck out of here. So I said, Moll, take Elaine to the Connaught Hotel. She said, what is that? And I said, London. She said, where's London? She'd never driven a car in Britain before, ever. I said, get her out of here. Anyway, Moll gets to the driving seat, drives off with Elaine. We go back, I and the press guy, to get her 12 pieces of luggage out of customs without her being there, which of course is not very easy. So this took a little bit of argy-bargy, and I think a bit of money changed hands. Mm-hmm. Theo was very good at that stuff. And we got her luggage and loaded in a cab, go to the hotel. You can hear the dog barking at the bottom of the stairs in the hotel. Anyway, I said, this is a crisis. If anyone finds out you've brought a dog into the country, we're in serious trouble. So Molly and I take the damn dog. And every day for the next few days, we meet her in Hyde Park so she can commune with her rather beastly little animal, which kept on peeing on our bed. Anyway, I then had an idea. The company will collect money and present Elaine with a new dog as consolation for her loss, because she had to come without it. So we had a press conference and we bought another dog, and the company gathered together and we handed Elaine this dog. And luckily the cops didn't find out about it, and it's now past the statute of limitations. She was a darling and we became very fond of her. It was hard work because you had to sit up till about 2 a.m. drinking with her, otherwise she got lonely.
Right. But
right to the end of her days, I've met her, at social occasions, and she was deeply grateful for the fact we got a dog into Britain. Anyway, that's that silly story.
Right. When you started out, who did you look up to? Who was your mentor?
Wow. Well, I was incredibly lucky. My last year at drama school, I went to Central School of Speech and Drama and Stage Management course, which wasn't very good in those days. It's now wonderful. But we did our sort of passing out performance for the actors at Her Majesty's Theatre in the afternoon. They had another show on at night. And I ran the corner. And after the show, the stage manager of the night show said, have you got a minute? So I went up to his office. He said, have you got a job? And I said, no, sir. Because we at Central were taught that when you left Central, if you worked for like 20 years in repertory, you might one day get a job in the West End, like Broadway, And Bob Stanton, the man's name, said, would you like a job? So I said, yes, sir. He said, when can you start? I said, when do you want me? This is Thursday. So he said, Monday? I I said, yes. So that's how it began. I had a job. So I went back to Central and said, I'm leaving on Friday. They said, you can't. I said, oh, yes, I can. And they said, oh, no, you can't. You've got to finish the end of term. And I said, I'm sorry, I'm leaving. I've got a job. And Gwyneth Thurburn, who was a doyen of speech training people who taught Laurence Olivier and stuff, came in and said, Mr. Pilbrow, I'll have to talk to your father. I said, please do, he'll be thrilled. He never thought I'd get a job. So I started at Her Majesty's, and I was the ASM there for 18 months, long run. Then they sent me out on the road with the show, a tour, a national tour. And we opened in Edinburgh, and they were hanging the show, and they were hanging it sort of wrong. And I had the whole plot in my notebook, my leafax, you know. So I ended up hanging the show, and then I lit it because nobody knew they had to light it. So anyway, the management were Williamson Music, Rodgers and Hammerstein in Britain, were rather pleased with me, I suppose, this young kid, you know, had all this stuff in his back pocket. So they brought me back to London for another show that ran about 18 months. But that sort of taught me that stage management wasn't quite the dream job that I envisaged, because you stood in the prompt corner every night and pressed a button when the actor said that word, you know, and it was a bit boring. One day I walked into Samuel French bookshop, and there was a book on what's called theatrical lighting practice or something like that. Joel Rubin wrote.
Right.
And I sat there in the bookshop, and there was a profession called the lighting designer, which was unheard of in Britain. And I thought, oh, shit, I could do that. You know, I lit all the school shows. That was my qualification, you know. So I go back to the theatre, and Bob Stanton was in a great state of excitement, funnily enough, because he said, Rich, I've got great news. I've just been offered My Fair Lady at Drury Lane. It's going to run for 5 years, and I'd like you to be the deputy. And I said, oh, Bob, sorry, I've just decided to do something else. He said, what are you talking about? I said, I'm going to be a lighting designer. He said, what? I'm going to be a light designer. Look, you can do it. I just bought a book about it. Anyway, Bob was appalled, but he went off and did My Fair Lady, and did run for 5 years at Drury Lane. And I became a lighting designer. And that was sort of complicated because I didn't have any money. And I thought, how am I going to actually live? Because nobody would pay you to do it because they didn't know they wanted you, you know. So I had this idea of a company that would have old lights and rent them to people, and I could live off the proceeds. And the words theatre projects had actually floated around in my adolescent brain for quite a while. So I formed this company, and my assistant at Her Majesty's, Brian Kendall, became my partner, and we announced we were the new lighting firm in town. And that's where it all began. And Her Majesty's were controlled by Williamson Music, who had done Oklahoma at Drury Lane, and under the stage at Drury Lane was a mountain of old lights from Oklahoma.
Right.
And Bob Stanton, my mentor, I said, Bob, you're not using this stuff. Could I make you an offer? He said, how much? So I said, how about 100 quid? He said, okay, if you take it away. So I got this mountain of old lights. There's one downstairs, actually. A mountain of old lights for £100. And that started the company.
Right.
So we started lighting rental. Then David Collison was a friend who was an ASM like me, but did sound. We started a sound company, and then it all grew. I began to get real busy and sort of took on assistants and then encouraged them to, you know, put their name out front, and sort of grew like Topsy, I suppose.
Yeah. Terrific.
But Bob was the principal mentor. It's a really important subject. One of the things I'm really a bit proud of is that I'm, you know, involved with the Wally Russell Foundation, charity,
Sure.
named after Wally. And, you know, a few years ago we started this annual Mentor of the Year award, which I'm really fond of. USITT now run it. Because we all have people who've helped us at the beginning of our
Sure.
careers.
Certainly.
And this is a way of recording who helped you in their career and putting it on the record. And I hope one day it'll produce a sort of vast family tree of mentorship through lots of different people's careers in backstage theatre. I think it's a really good thing to happen.
Yeah. Agreed. In addition to all the other things that you've done, you're also an author. What's that process like?
Yeah, interesting. I think the best thing that anyone can do when they leave drama school is to write a book, because they are the most fraudulent road to success you can possibly imagine. I was in my 20s when I began. I thought I should write a book about stage lighting. Everyone said, don't do that because everyone will be able to do it. And I said, I don't think that matters too much. Now, I'd learned everything from books, I have to say. I mean, Fred Bentham, Harold Ridge, all the names in the 30s and 40s. I'd never been to school. I'd never learned any of this stuff in school. I learned it from reading books.
Right.
And they were all out of date. And I thought, well, I'll try to go at writing a book about stage lighting. And it was published, first in 1970, I think. So I was like, how old was I? I can't work it out. Anyway, early 30s when it was published. I was in my 20s when I wrote it. And it's frightening, because as soon as it's got covers and it's printed, people think it must be true. And of course, as we're learning today in our political climate, what people say isn't necessarily true, let alone writing it down. I think I disagreed with half of the book before it was published, but it did real well. I have to say I'm incredibly lucky again, and it's been on sale ever since, and that's a long, long time. Now, the fun bit about the lighting book was I went and did a lecture tour in China for the Ministry of Culture in 80-something, 86, 85. And at the end of this lecture tour, which I lectured lots of kids, and kids to extremely old grandpas, and at the end of it, there was a little ceremony of thanks. So they presented me with their book on stage lighting. And you know, all this, thank you so much, and all this. And I take this book, it's next door, open it up, and this is their book on stage lighting. The pictures look frightfully familiar. You know, they presented me with my own book, which they pirated years before.
Right.
Which was fun.
The highest praise, isn't it?
Oh, or something. Yeah.
Or
yeah.
something.
Yeah,
Exactly.
that's right. That's right. But, you know, you're trying to pass on a bit of something. I then did a book about the Walt Disney Concert Hall, which we were the theatre consultants on with Frank Gehry, architect. And that was obviously a real famous place. And so that we tried to say something about the process of designing theatres. And then at the end of it all, I thought I should write this theatre project book about this silly life one's led. And the great bunch of people who made it all possible. You know, one of my founding principles was, if you're going to try and start a company, you've got to hire people who are cleverer than you are. And I was extraordinarily lucky, and found lots of people who were much cleverer. So this is their story, you know.
So a theater project is a memoir, more than anything else?
Yes, sort of. A memoir, but not of me, of 100 people who made it all happen. You know?
Sure.
Yeah.
So you worked on a movie.
Yeah. Again, this is a Molly story. So I was a producer of shows in the West End. Did about 30 productions in the West End. But I'd always been absolutely fascinated by the movies, which I enjoy going to more. And Moll is a new arrival in Britain. I always thought I should show some of the country. So I took her up to the Lake District, northwest England, and you know, it's one of the most beautiful places in Britain. Mm-hmm. And we came out of the hotel after dinner, and the moon came up over the mountain. One of those Kodak moments, you know. And I said, my God, that's beautiful. Why does nobody ever make movies about the Lake District? So she didn't know, and I didn't know, and I thought, oh, hang on. Swallows and Amazons, children's books written in the 30s. There are 13 of them by a man named Arthur Ransom. Incredibly popular, they still are in England and Canada and Japan, funnily enough. And I thought that would be they're about kids' liberation. They're about kids getting out from under their parents, going off boating, camping on islands in the lake. Wonderful stories. So that'd be a great movie. So I go back to the hotel, called my secretary in London and said, Carol, find out if anyone has ever made a film of Swallows and Amazons. If not, can we buy the film rights? She said, you can't. I said, Carol, just find out. She said, you can't. I said, what do you mean you can't? She said, well, my last job was for Jonathan Cape, the publishers, who control the books. And Arthur Ransom is still alive. He will never, ever give permission for anyone to make a movie of it, because he's afraid they'll be Disney-fied and sort of, you know, made sexy and stuff like that, because they're really innocent. They're all pre-teen children. Anyway, I said, well, just ask. So, you know, I met the man. And Ransom had just died, and his widow controlled the estate, who was an amazing woman, lived in an old people's home near Oxford. She had been Trotsky's secretary during the Russian Revolution. That's true.
Oh my God.
Ransom had been a reporter for The Guardian in Moscow when the revolution happened. He knew Trotsky and Stalin and all these people, and had fallen in love with this girl who is now 80 years old and a tyrant. But they'd eloped, and he had started writing children's books. Anyways, it took a year to persuade her that we were going to do them respectfully, and we made this movie. And a great guy who died many years ago, Neville Thompson, was my partner in the producing business, and he had been in movies. He sort of was the line producer on lots of Ken Russell's movies. Mm. So we put it together, and I went to Bernie Delfont, who was a big theatre magnate. He was one of the heads of EMI, and they financed the film. And we did it, and it was a fabulous experience. I mean, I got a learning experience. I knew nothing about that world. And the fact that you can put a camera sort of there, and you don't have to light it, so only that bit shows, you know. Wonderful. And it's a beautiful movie. It's still showed every Christmas and Easter in Britain.
Mm.
And they've just brought out a new DVD of it.
Oh.
It was gorgeous. So that was a fun experience.
Right.
And I really should have done nothing else but that. But I was busy with other things, which I sort of regret. That was fun.
Good. Richard, you've had a long and illustrious career, which I hope will continue for many more years. But what do you have to say, taking that career into consideration? What do you have to say to those who are just starting out, coming out of school, coming out of university, beginning in their careers in the industry? What advice can you give them?
That's such a tough question. I think that these are really good times to get into the theatre. My dad was appalled when he heard I was thinking going to the theatre. You know, my grandfather was a Methodist preacher who believed they're all dens of the devil. You know, well, the times have changed. Theatre today is a backstage theatre. I think is a bloody good way of spending a life. You're not going to get rich unless you're extraordinarily lucky, but you're going to have a very exciting, fun time. But how do you make it? That's tough, because clearly I was really lucky. I was like the first lighting designer. Now there are 2,000 members of the society in Britain, you know, all competing against each other. So life is tough. How do you manage? You've got to get a job. Then, of course, you've got to want somebody there who employs you has got to want to employ you again. And that maybe is more difficult. I think you have to take anything you can get. And the humble sweeping the stage is only a true analogy. But the most important thing is somebody's got to like you to invite you back again. Every single thing you do influences what's going to happen the next time. And so you work bloody hard and you kill yourself to deliver 120% of what you've been asked to do. Demands lunatic dedication. But theatre's a disease. I mean, if you catch it, you can't get rid of it, if you really caught it. And you know when you have.
There is no cure.
There is no cure. It's absolutely, it's a terminal disease. And you've just got to do better than anyone ever thinks you're going to. Try and be really generous to people you work with, and get hired again. I think that's the main thing. Get hired, get the second job.
Right.
Then you've done something right.
Right. Terrific. Well, Richard, it's been an honor. It's been a privilege. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us.
Thank you. Can we do an Angela Merkel?
Can we
shake hands,
yeah,
Angela Merkel.
We will indeed shake hands, yes.
We didn't get on him at all, did we?
Well, we did. No, that's probably a good